August 5th, 1945, Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi stands before a detailed map of the Pacific Theater, red pins marking American naval positions that have crept inexorably closer to the Japanese mainland over the past 3 years. Behind him, intelligence reports stack in neat piles, each document confirming what every military analyst has known but few dare speak aloud. Japan's industrial capacity is collapsing. Her navy exists mostly on paper. Her air force burns through pilots faster than training schools can replace them. But the mathematics of invasion still favour the defenders. American casualties for Operation Downfall are projected at 1 million men. Japanese casualties at 10 million. The home islands possess natural defensive advantages that could bleed the Americans white across months of brutal urban warfare. At 58, Onishi has witnessed Japan's transformation from feudal isolation to industrial empire to desperate fortress state. His methodical mind processes intelligence with the precision of an engineer calculating structural loads. Every American advantage has been quantified. Superior naval strength, unlimited industrial production, technological sophistication that Japanese factories can no longer match. Yet none of these factors guarantee swift victory against defenders who view death as preferable to surrender. The telephone call that would shatter everything had not yet come. In 18 hours, a single American bomber would demonstrate power that rendered all strategic calculations obsolete. Colonel Naomasa Hashimoto arrived at headquarters carrying the morning intelligence briefing, his uniform bearing the crisp precision of a staff officer who had never doubted Japan's ultimate victory until reality began contradicting doctrine with mathematical certainty. 3 years of analysing American capabilities had transformed his initial confidence into grudging respect for enemy industrial might. The Americans built ships faster than submarines could sink them, produced aircraft in quantities that overwhelmed Japanese manufacturing capacity, and demonstrated logistical capabilities that defied traditional military wisdom about extended supply lines. Yet certain fundamentals remained unchanged. Geography still mattered. The home islands created defensive bottlenecks that would channel American assault forces into killing zones, where Japanese defenders held every advantage. Urban warfare favoured determination over technology. Industrial capacity meant nothing if invading forces bled to death in the rubble of Japanese cities. Hashimoto spread reconnaissance photographs across the conference table with practiced efficiency. His intelligence background providing context for images that revealed American preparations for the largest amphibious assault in human history. Okinawa had cost the Americans 49,000 casualties in 82 days of fighting. Kyushu would demand far higher prices from attackers who faced defenders fighting for their homeland rather than distant islands. Admiral Soemu Toyoda entered the briefing room with the measured bearing of a naval officer who had watched Japan's fleet reduced from Pacific dominance to desperate coastal defense. His strategic mind grasped the mathematical realities that younger officers refused to acknowledge. Japan could not win this war in any conventional sense, but she could make victory so expensive that Americans would negotiate rather than pay the butcher's bill for total conquest. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded carrier task forces before American industrial might made such formations impossible to maintain. "Intelligence indicates Operation Downfall will commence within 60 days. Our defensive preparations must maximize casualties among invasion forces while preserving our ability to resist prolonged occupation." The strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Transform every city into a fortress, every civilian into a potential combatant, every street into a killing ground where American technological advantages became meaningless against defenders who embraced death as tactical doctrine. The Americans possessed superior equipment, unlimited ammunition, and overwhelming numbers. But they also valued their soldiers' lives in ways that Japanese commanders viewed as strategic weakness. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the aviator who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, studied aerial photographs of American fleet concentrations with the eye of someone who understood how dramatically the balance of power had shifted since 1941. Where Japanese naval aviation had once ruled Pacific skies, now American carrier groups operated with impunity off the Japanese coast. The numbers told an unforgiving story of industrial capacity translated into military dominance. American Pacific Fleet now comprises 28 fleet carriers, 71 escort carriers, 23 battleships, and 72 cruisers, he reported, his calculations revealing the mathematical impossibility of Japanese naval resistance. Our remaining operational strength consists of 6 carriers, 4 battleships, and 19 cruisers, most with critical fuel shortages that limit operational capability. Yet even these devastating statistics failed to account for the most significant factor in Japanese defensive planning. The American invasion would require establishing beachheads under fire, securing ports for supply operations, and advancing inland against defenders who possessed intimate knowledge of terrain that channeled attacks into predetermined killing zones. Technology could not eliminate the fundamental advantages that geography provided to desperate defenders. Major General Masakazu Kawabe, commanding officer of Japan's remaining air defenses, added his assessment to the morning briefing. His experience directing kamikaze operations had taught him how effectively motivated pilots could damage superior enemy forces through tactics that American training had never anticipated. Current operational strength includes 2,800 aircraft of all types with fuel reserve sufficient for one major defensive operation, Kawabe announced. His strategic planning focused on maximizing damage during the critical hours when American forces would be most vulnerable during amphibious assault operations. Kamikaze tactics demonstrated at Okinawa achieved casualty ratios of 1.78 American personnel per Japanese aircraft. Applied against invasion forces, these methods could inflict unacceptable losses on enemy assault troops. The mathematics of mutual destruction had become Japan's final strategic option. Unable to achieve victory through conventional military operations, Japanese planners calculated that sufficient American casualties would force political settlement rather than complete conquest. The home islands represented Japan's last strategic asset, terrain that would channel American attacks into concentrated killing zones, where defensive advantages could offset technological superiority. Intelligence reports from captured American documents revealed invasion planning that confirmed Japanese strategic assumptions about enemy casualties' expectations. Operation Downfall projected American losses at 268,000 dead and 1.6 million wounded during the first phase of operations alone. These numbers represented acceptable costs to American military planners, but Japanese strategists hoped that actual casualties would exceed projections sufficiently to trigger political reconsideration of total victory objectives. Colonel Takushiro Hattori, Chief of Staff for Imperial General Headquarters, presented the comprehensive defensive strategy that would transform the Japanese archipelago into a fortress designed to maximize American casualties, rather than achieve military victory in any traditional sense. His planning emphasized urban warfare, civilian resistance, and tactical dispositions that would force attacking forces to pay enormous costs for every mile of Japanese territory. Primary defensive positions utilized terrain advantages that channel enemy advances into prepared killing zones, Hattori explained, his strategic vision encompassing every aspect of Japanese resistance from coastal fortifications to urban strongpoints. Secondary positions provide fallback capabilities that ensure continued resistance even after initial defensive lines are breached. Tertiary positions in major cities guarantee prolonged urban warfare that will maximize enemy casualties while demonstrating Japanese determination to resist total conquest. The strategy represented military planning at its most desperate and sophisticated, acknowledging Japanese inability to achieve conventional victory while maximizing the costs that Americans would pay for complete conquest. Every defensive calculation assumed that sufficient enemy casualties would eventually force political compromise rather than military surrender. As morning sunlight filtered through headquarters windows, senior Japanese military leaders reviewed intelligence that painted an unforgiving picture of American capabilities and Japanese limitations. Yet none of them could imagine that within hours a single aircraft carrying a single bomb would render all their careful calculations completely meaningless. The age of nuclear warfare was about to begin, and Japan's strategic planners were still thinking in terms of conventional military mathematics. The B-29 superfortress Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island at 2:45 a.m. Its four Wright R3350 engines generating 8,800 horsepower against the humid Pacific air. Colonel Paul Tibbets felt the aircraft settle into its climbing attitude with the familiar confidence of a pilot who had logged thousands of hours in the cockpit of America's most advanced strategic bomber. Behind him, 10 tons of precisely machined uranium and conventional explosives occupied the bomb bay in a configuration that represented 4 years of scientific achievement and industrial mobilization beyond anything human civilization had previously attempted. At 31,000 feet, the Enola Gay cruised toward Japan with mechanical precision that reflected American manufacturing capabilities at their absolute peak. Every component had been engineered for reliability under conditions that no peacetime designer could have imagined. The pressurized cabin maintained sea-level atmospheric conditions while the aircraft operated at altitudes where human life was impossible without technological intervention. The Norden bomb site represented optical engineering so sophisticated that its technical specifications remained classified at the highest levels of military secrecy. Captain Robert Lewis, co-pilot and veteran of 37 bombing missions over Japan, monitored engine parameters with a methodical attention that kept 4 engine aircraft operational during extended flights over hostile territory. 3 years of combat operations had taught him to trust instruments over intuition, mathematics over optimism. The Wright Cyclone engines consumed fuel at rates calculated down to the gallon, providing power margins sufficient for the round trip to Japan with reserves adequate for combat maneuvering if enemy fighters achieved intercept altitude. Technical Sergeant George Caron occupied the tail gunner position, scanning Pacific skies through powered turrets that could traverse and elevate with hydraulic precision. His experience on previous missions had demonstrated Japanese air defenses were increasingly desperate and uncoordinated. But desperation made enemy pilots unpredictable in ways that threatened even heavily defended bombers. The superfortress carried 13 50-caliber machine guns arranged in remote-controlled turrets that provided defensive firepower superior to any bomber in military history. The weapon nestled in the bomb bay represented scientific achievement that transcended conventional military engineering. Little Boy contained 64 kilograms of uranium-235 enriched through industrial processes that had consumed more electricity than entire cities. The gun-type detonation mechanism used conventional explosives to fire one subcritical mass of uranium into another, achieving the critical density necessary for sustained nuclear chain reaction. The physics were elegant in their mathematical certainty, but the engineering required precision manufacturing at tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Dr. Robert Serber had personally briefed Tibbets on the weapon's capabilities during classified sessions at Los Alamos. The calculations were staggering in their implications. 20 kilotons of explosive force equivalent to 40 million pounds of conventional TNT concentrated into a device weighing 9,700 pounds. The blast effects would create temperatures exceeding those at the center of the sun, generating thermal radiation that would ignite combustible materials at distances measured in miles. The pressure wave would level reinforced concrete buildings across areas larger than entire city districts. Yet even these theoretical projections failed to convey the psychological impact that nuclear weapons would have on military planners who had spent their careers calculating conventional force requirements. The atomic bomb represented a fundamental transformation in warfare where single aircraft could achieve destruction that previously required 1,000-plane raids operating over extended periods. Strategic bombing theory would require complete revision to account for weapons that made traditional military mathematics obsolete. Navigator Captain Theodore Van Kirk plotted the course to Hiroshima with precision that reflected years of celestial navigation training enhanced by electronic systems that provided accuracy impossible during peacetime aviation. The primary target had been selected through comprehensive analysis of Japanese industrial capabilities, urban density, and military significance. Hiroshima contained. Intelligence reports indicated major army installations, weapons manufacturing facilities, and transportation networks critical to Japanese defensive preparations. The secondary target, Kokura, possessed even greater military importance as a center for ammunition production and steel manufacturing. The tertiary option, Nagasaki, represented Japan's largest shipbuilding center and a critical component of naval construction capabilities. Each target had been carefully evaluated to maximize strategic impact while demonstrating American capability to destroy Japanese industrial capacity through single bombing missions that required minimal aircraft commitment. Weather reconnaissance aircraft had departed Iwo Jima 3 hours earlier, their mission to provide real-time atmospheric conditions over potential targets. Cloud cover could obscure visual bombing necessary for accurate weapon delivery. Winds at altitude would affect aircraft approach angles and bomb ballistics. Temperature variations influenced air density calculations that determined optimal release altitude and timing sequences. Major Claude Atherley, piloting the weather reconnaissance aircraft Straight Flush, transmitted coded reports that indicated clear skies over Hiroshima, with visibility exceeding 10 miles at all altitudes. Wind conditions were within acceptable parameters for precision bombing operations. Japanese air defenses showed minimal activity with no interceptor aircraft detected above 25,000 feet. The primary target remained viable for nuclear weapon delivery under optimal conditions. The Japanese radar network that had once provided early warning against American bomber formations now operated with critical gaps that reflected equipment failures and personnel shortages that could not be remedied through tactical improvisation. Operators who detected the small American formation approaching Japanese airspace assumed it represented another reconnaissance mission rather than strategic attack formation. 3 aircraft posed no significant threat to a nation that had endured raids involving hundreds of bombers operating in coordinated waves. Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant Wyatt Dusenbury monitored fuel consumption rates that would determine whether the mission could achieve its objectives while maintaining sufficient reserves for emergency operations. The flight to Japan consumed fuel at calculated rates, but combat operations over enemy territory introduced variables that could not be precisely predicted. Japanese fighter interception, navigation errors, or mechanical problems might require power settings that exceeded planned fuel consumption. The Enola Gay crossed into Japanese airspace at 8:09 a.m., maintaining altitude and heading that would position the aircraft for optimal weapon delivery over the primary target. Below, Hiroshima appeared as a geometric pattern of urban development, surrounded by mountains that would channel and amplify blast effects throughout the metropolitan area. The city's population exceeded 350,000 civilians, plus military personnel, whose Japanese defensive exact numbers remained classified in planning. Bombardier Major Thomas Ferriby began final preparations for weapon release, his Norden bomb sight calculating trajectory solutions that accounted for aircraft speed, altitude, wind conditions, and ballistic characteristics of a weapon unlike anything previously delivered from military aircraft. The site's precision optics provided magnification sufficient for target identification from altitudes that placed the bomber beyond effective range of Japanese anti-aircraft artillery. At 8:14 a.m., the atomic bomb separated from the Enola Gay's bomb bay at 31,060 feet above Hiroshima. 43 seconds of free fall would elapse before the weapon reached its predetermined detonation altitude of 1,968 feet above the city center. During those brief moments, Japanese military observers on the ground watched what appeared to be another routine American reconnaissance flight, unaware that human civilization was about to cross a threshold from which there could be no return. At 8:15 a.m., August 6, 1945, the mathematics of warfare changed forever above the city of Hiroshima. Little Boy detonated with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT concentrated into a single point of nuclear fire that transformed matter into energy, according to Einstein's equation, with ruthless efficiency. The temperature at ground zero reached 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 times hotter than steel's melting point. The initial flash of thermal radiation travelled at light speed, igniting everything combustible within a radius of 2 miles before the sound of the explosion could reach human ears. Colonel Tibbets felt the Enola Gay lift violently as the shockwave struck the aircraft 9 miles from the detonation point. The B-29 bucked and rolled with forces that exceeded anything in his flight training experience. Behind them, a column of superheated air and debris rose into the stratosphere like a mechanical mushroom constructed from the remains of human civilization. The cloud climbed past 40,000 feet, towering above their aircraft with dimensions that defied conventional understanding of explosive capability. Technical Sergeant Karen, staring through his tailgunner's position, struggled to find words for destruction that transcended military vocabulary. The city of Hiroshima had simply disappeared beneath a roiling mass of fire and debris that spread across the landscape with geometric precision. Where moments before a metropolitan area had housed 350,000 people, now only smoke and flame marked coordinates on his navigation charts. The blast wave travelled outward at 700 miles per hour, flattening reinforced concrete buildings designed to withstand conventional bombing raids. Structures that had survived months of American air attacks collapsed instantly under pressure differentials that exceeded their engineering specifications by factors of 10. Steel framework twisted into abstract sculptures of metal. Glass windows vaporized at distances measured in miles from ground zero. Within the first minute, 80,000 people ceased to exist, not killed by conventional weapons that left identifiable casualties, but transformed into atomic shadow and radioactive dust through processes that operated at the molecular level. Human bodies exposed to thermal radiation at close range underwent instantaneous cremation, leaving only dark silhouettes burned into concrete surfaces that would preserve the moment of nuclear fire for decades. Captain Lewis recorded observations in the aircraft log with handwriting that betrayed the psychological shock of witnessing destruction beyond human experience. His engineering background provided no framework for quantifying devastation that eliminated entire city districts through single weapon employment. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. One aircraft, one bomb, one city destroyed completely in seconds rather than months of sustained bombing operations. Dr. Luis Alvarez, scientific observer aboard the accompanying instrument aircraft, monitored radiation detection equipment that registered energy levels beyond the calibrated range of his instruments. The nuclear chain reaction had proceeded exactly as theoretical calculations predicted, converting uranium atoms into explosive force with efficiency that demonstrated mastery over fundamental physical processes. Yet witnessing theoretical physics transformed into military capability created psychological impact that no laboratory experiment could approximate. The mushroom cloud continued expanding, reaching altitudes where commercial aircraft operated during peacetime flights. Radioactive particles dispersed according to atmospheric conditions, carrying contamination across areas that extended far beyond the immediate blast zone. The invisible aftermath of nuclear warfare had begun, creating hazards that would persist for decades through isotopic decay processes that operated according to half-life calculations rather than military timetables. Japanese radar operators at Kure Naval Base, 20 miles from Hiroshima, watched their screens register electromagnetic interference that obliterated all electronic signatures across their monitoring sector. Communication lines to Hiroshima went silent simultaneously, suggesting either equipment failure or something unprecedented that exceeded their operational experience. No single conventional weapon could create electromagnetic effects at such distances. Lieutenant Colonel Kakue Nagumo, commanding the Western District Communications Center, attempted to establish contact with Hiroshima military installations through multiple radio frequencies and telephone circuits. Every communication channel returned only static interference punctuated by brief transmissions from outlying observation posts, reporting a brilliant flash followed by total destruction of the city centre. The report seemed impossible, describing devastation that exceeded the capabilities of any known American weapon. Major Eizo Hori, stationed at Hiroshima Castle Military Headquarters, had been reviewing morning intelligence reports when the nuclear detonation occurred less than 2 miles from his position. The blast wave arrived with crushing force that collapsed the castle's ancient stone walls and modern military installations simultaneously. Those personnel who survived the initial destruction found themselves trapped beneath rubble in a landscape transformed into radioactive wasteland. The few coherent radio transmissions that penetrated electromagnetic interference painted a picture of destruction that challenged Japanese military understanding of American bombing capabilities. Reconnaissance aircraft dispatched from nearby airfields reported a column of smoke and debris rising to stratospheric altitudes above coordinates where Hiroshima had existed minutes earlier. The metropolitan area appeared to have been erased from the landscape through unknown weapons effects. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters in Tokyo received fragmentary reports that suggested Hiroshima had suffered catastrophic damage from a new type of American weapon. Initial assessments dismissed these accounts as exaggerated battlefield reports from personnel under extreme stress. No conventional bomb could eliminate an entire city through single aircraft delivery. The intelligence had to represent multiple weapon impacts or coordinated attack formations that observers had misidentified. Vice Admiral Onishi studied communication transcripts that described destruction exceeding anything in military history. His methodical mind struggled to process reports of instantaneous citywide devastation achieved through minimal aircraft commitment. American bombing doctrine had required hundreds of aircraft operating in coordinated waves to achieve significant urban destruction. Single aircraft attacks were reconnaissance missions or precision strikes against specific targets, rather than area bombardment operations. Colonel Hashimoto attempted to coordinate damage assessment operations through surviving communication networks, but electromagnetic interference continued disrupting radio transmissions across the entire Hiroshima prefecture. Telephone lines remained severed. Telegraph systems showed no activity. The communication blackout suggested either systematic infrastructure destruction or weapon effects that exceeded conventional explosive capabilities. At 11:30 a.m., a Japanese reconnaissance aircraft managed to approach within 10 miles of Hiroshima before radiation exposure forced the pilot to abandon his survey mission. His brief visual observation confirmed reports of total urban destruction across areas measured in square miles rather than city blocks. The pilot's description ruins deaf, transformed into smoking of a landscaped explanation through conventional military analysis. Admiral Toyoda convened an emergency staff meeting to evaluate intelligence, suggesting American possession of weapons that rendered traditional defensive calculations meaningless. If single aircraft could achieve destruction equivalent to massive bombing raids, then Japanese defensive strategy based on inflicting unacceptable casualties on invasion forces would require fundamental revision. American forces would not need to accept high casualties for territorial conquest if they possessed weapons capable of eliminating entire cities through minimal aircraft deployment. The strategic implications struck Japanese military planners with mathematical certainty that transcended cultural denial or institutional resistance to unwelcome intelligence. Urban warfare advantages that formed the foundation of Japanese defensive planning would become irrelevant against weapons that eliminated cities rather than requiring street-by-street conquest. Civilian population that represented tactical assets in defensive operations would become strategic liabilities vulnerable to instantaneous elimination. Lieutenant Commander Fuchida, analyzing reconnaissance photographs and survivor accounts, began calculating the tactical requirements for American forces equipped with weapons of such destructive capability. Traditional invasion planning assumed sustained ground operations supported by conventional air bombardment. Nuclear weapons transformed strategic bombing from logistical support into decisive military operations that could achieve war aims without requiring amphibious assault or prolonged territorial occupation. By afternoon, fragmentary intelligence from Hiroshima had reached Emperor Hirohito's personal staff through military channels that bypassed normal reporting procedures. The preliminary assessments suggested American development of weapons that exceeded Japanese defensive capabilities through technological advancement rather than industrial quantity. The war's mathematical foundation had shifted from resource competition to scientific supremacy that Japan could not match through conventional military mobilization. Japanese military leadership found themselves confronting strategic reality that invalidated every defensive assumption they had developed during 3 years of increasingly desperate planning. The home islands no longer represented defensive advantages that could offset American material superiority. Nuclear weapons had transformed geographical barriers into tactical irrelevancies that could be eliminated through scientific rather than military means. The first coherent intelligence reports from Hiroshima reached Imperial General Headquarters at 3:47 p.m., transmitted through emergency communication channels that had survived the electromagnetic devastation. Major General Seizo Arizue, Chief of Intelligence, read the preliminary damage assessment with the methodical precision of an analyst who had spent his career evaluating enemy capabilities through quantifiable metrics. Every number challenged fundamental assumptions about American strategic bombing doctrine and Japanese defensive mathematics. Casualty estimates exceeded 100,000 from single-weapon deployment. Urban destruction encompassed 4.7 square miles of complete devastation. Radiation effects extended beyond conventional blast radius through mechanisms that intelligence analysts could not explain using established military science. The weapon had achieved destruction ratios that violated every calculation Japanese planners had developed regarding American bombing efficiency and resource requirements. Colonel Saburo Hayashi, Chief of Operations Planning, attempted to integrate these reports into existing defensive frameworks, but the mathematics refused to cooperate with conventional strategic analysis. Japanese defensive doctrine assumed American forces would require months of sustained bombing operations to achieve significant urban destruction. Single aircraft carrying single weapons that eliminated entire cities represented technological capabilities that rendered traditional military planning obsolete. The psychological impact on Japanese military leadership transcended tactical concerns into existential questions about national survival against enemies who possessed weapons that operated according to scientific principles rather than industrial capacity. Admiral Kichisaburo Nomura, former ambassador to Washington, understood American industrial might better than most Japanese officials, but even his assessments had failed to anticipate technological advancement that transformed theoretical physics into military supremacy. Dr. Yoshio Nishina, Japan's leading nuclear physicist, received classified briefings about Hiroshima's destruction through scientific channels that connected academic research with military intelligence. His understanding of atomic theory provided context for weapon effects that exceeded conventional explosive capabilities by factors that seemed impossible until American scientists had achieved controlled nuclear chain reactions through industrial processes beyond Japanese technological reach. The uranium enrichment facilities at Oak Ridge had consumed more electrical power than entire Japanese cities, while producing weapons-grade fissile material through separation techniques that Japanese science could not duplicate with available resources. American industrial capacity had been channeled into scientific achievement that created military advantages beyond anything Japanese strategic planners had considered possible. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe, commanding Japan's air defense forces, studied reconnaissance photographs that revealed destruction patterns unlike anything in military history. Conventional bombing created scattered damage areas connected by transportation corridors and defensive positions. Nuclear weapons eliminated geographic features entirely, transforming urban landscapes into radioactive wastelands where traditional military operations became impossible. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate tactical concerns into fundamental questions about Japan's ability to continue military resistance against enemies who possessed scientific capabilities that exceeded conventional warfare limitations. American forces would not need to accept casualties from urban combat if they could eliminate cities through single aircraft missions operating beyond effective range of Japanese defensive systems. Major Kenji Hatanaka, a staff officer responsible for Homeland Defense Coordination, calculated the mathematical impossibility of protecting Japanese population centers against nuclear attack. American bomber formations had previously required hundreds of aircraft to achieve significant urban destruction, creating defensive opportunities where Japanese fighters could inflict casualties on attacking formations. Single aircraft carrying atomic weapons eliminated defensive advantages that geography and determination had provided against conventional bombing raids. Emperor Hirohito's advisors briefed him on intelligence that suggested American possession of multiple nuclear weapons capable of eliminating Japanese cities at rates that exceeded the nation's ability to maintain governmental functions or military resistance. The mathematics were unforgiving in their strategic clarity. Japan possessed insufficient defensive resources to protect essential population and industrial centers against enemies who could achieve complete urban destruction through minimal aircraft deployment. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo began drafting preliminary diplomatic communications that would explore American willingness to negotiate Japanese surrender under terms that preserved some remnant of national sovereignty. The nuclear demonstration at Hiroshima had eliminated Japanese military options for prolonging the war through defensive tactics that maximized American casualties while preserving Japanese resistance capabilities. The Soviet Union's entry into the Pacific War at midnight on August 8th created additional strategic pressures that combined with nuclear threats to eliminate Japan's remaining diplomatic and military alternatives. Soviet forces launched coordinated offensives across Manchuria with mechanized capabilities that overwhelmed Japanese defensive positions through conventional military superiority, enhanced by tactical surprise and operational momentum. Japanese intelligence had calculated that Soviet military involvement would strain American resources and create opportunities for negotiated settlement that preserved Japanese territorial integrity in exchange for military surrender. Nuclear weapons eliminated these diplomatic possibilities by demonstrating American capability to achieve complete Japanese defeat without requiring Soviet assistance or territorial concessions to coalition partners. General Korechaka Anami, war minister and advocate for continued resistance, found his strategic arguments undermined by technological realities that transcended military tradition or cultural determination. Japanese forces could inflict casualties on American invasion troops through defensive tactics that utilized terrain advantages and civilian participation. But nuclear weapons made invasion unnecessary by providing alternative methods for achieving complete Japanese surrender through scientific rather than military means. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, the second atomic bomb detonated above Nagasaki with explosive force that confirmed American possession of multiple nuclear weapons capable of systematic elimination of Japanese cities. The Fat Man plutonium device demonstrated different nuclear technology that achieved comparable destructive effects through implosion mechanisms rather than gun-type detonation systems used at Hiroshima. The strategic message was unmistakable in its mathematical certainty. American scientists had mastered multiple approaches to nuclear weapon construction, suggesting industrial capacity for sustained atomic bombardment that could eliminate Japanese urban centers faster than conventional military resistance could adapt to nuclear warfare realities. The technological gap between American scientific achievement and Japanese defensive capabilities had become insurmountable through conventional military means. Vice Admiral Takagi Sokichi, one of Japan's most respected strategic analysts, submitted confidential assessments to Imperial Headquarters that acknowledged the futility of continued military resistance against enemies who possessed weapons that operated beyond traditional warfare limitations. Nuclear technology had transformed strategic calculations from resource competition into scientific supremacy that Japan could not challenge through conventional military mobilization or tactical innovation. Supreme Council meetings during the days following Nagasaki revealed deep divisions among Japanese leadership regarding surrender terms and conditions. Military traditionalists argued for continued resistance that would preserve national honor, even at the cost of complete destruction. Pragmatic officials recognized that nuclear weapons had eliminated Japan's ability to negotiate from positions of military strength while preserving population centers essential for national survival. Emperor Hirohito's intervention on August 15th resolved institutional deadlock through imperial authority that transcended military protocol and cultural tradition. His radio broadcast announcing Japanese surrender acknowledged American technological superiority that had rendered continued resistance futile, while emphasizing preservation of Japanese civilization through acceptance of occupation rather than atomic annihilation. The mathematical reality of nuclear warfare had transformed strategic calculations that governed international relations and military planning. American possession of atomic weapons created power differentials that exceeded conventional military advantages through scientific achievement that demonstrated industrial capacity channeled into theoretical physics with practical applications beyond anything previous warfare had encompassed. Japanese military leaders who had calculated defensive advantages based on geography, determination, and willingness to accept casualties found their strategic assumptions invalidated by weapons that eliminated urban centers through single aircraft missions. The age of nuclear warfare had begun with demonstrations that forever changed how nations would calculate military capabilities, diplomatic negotiations, and strategic planning in a world where scientific advancement could achieve decisive advantages through technologies that transcended conventional warfare limitations. The mushroom clouds that rose above Hiroshima and Nagasaki had accomplished what 3 years of conventional warfare could not achieve. Japanese military planners who had spent months calculating defensive advantages, casualty ratios, and strategic mathematics found themselves confronting a fundamental transformation in the nature of warfare itself. Their methodical preparations for Operation Downfall, their carefully constructed fortress mentality, their willingness to sacrifice millions for national survival, all rendered meaningless by scientific achievement that operated beyond traditional military calculations. August 15, 1945 marked not just Japan's surrender, but the end of an era where industrial capacity and tactical determination could offset technological disadvantage through human sacrifice and geographical advantage. The atomic bomb had demonstrated that scientific supremacy could achieve decisive victory through minimal resource commitment, eliminating the mathematical foundations upon which conventional military strategy had operated for centuries. The Japanese military's inability to comprehend nuclear warfare's devastating power reflected broader institutional failure to recognize how scientific advancement could transcend traditional warfare limitations. In 43 seconds of free fall above Hiroshima, American nuclear technology had invalidated every strategic assumption that Japanese planners had developed during 4 years of increasingly desperate resistance. The age of atomic warfare had begun with mathematical certainty that would govern international relations for generations to come, forever changing how military leaders would calculate power, plan strategy, and measure the true cost of national survival.